Hello and welcome again to the Writer Review. This is Eric Carrot Writer, and this week we're going to be taking a look back at the 2009 drama football hooliganism movie titled The Firm. Now, The Firm runs for 1 hour and 30 minutes long. It is directed by Nick Love. It is produced by Rhys Dow. The script was also written by Nick Love, and it is based off of the original 1988 TV movie script by Al Hunter Ashton. Now, the score was done by Laura Rossi, the cinematography by Matt Gray, and it was edited by Stuart Gazzard. And the stars of the movie are Calum McNab, Paul Anderson, Louis Banks, Daniel Mays, and Camille Coduri. Now, under the direction of Nick Love, who also wrote the script, he directed other football hooligan-themed movies in the past. He has took it upon himself to remake one of the more better-made films on this subject matter, based off of Alan Clark's 1988 TV movie. No, it was another Alan Clark. I'm not talking about, the original lead singer of the British band The Hollies. Because the Hollies Alan Clark is, I believe he's pretty much still alive, although, he's in his late 70s. But this Alan Clark, who directed the original 1988 version of The Firm, well, he has passed on. Nick Love's version of The Firm sadly doesn't live up to the expectations of Clark's film, no matter how much of the effort he puts into it. Clark's version had a feeling of authenticity thanks to a strong cast, including a very edgy performance by Gary Oldman. Unfortunately, the remake has a very non-existent direction and just lazily pads on the typical movie tropes that are featured here in movies of this caliber. Nick Love doesn't really give us a chance to get the audience invested into the characters, and therefore doesn't have anything to genuinely care for them because it's not in his best interests. He just wanted to make money off of a remake of a TV movie that was definitely far superior than this movie. I don't know if it ever really was ever released in the movies, or whether it was direct for TV, just like the original 1988 version. But all I know is, just because you think a movie is based off of a TV movie, you may think that those kind of movies are bad just because it is low budget. Well, there have been a few duds in the past, yes. But aside from that, not all TV movies are bad. Some of them just didn't probably have the money or the finances to get the theatrical green light. But here, this is a movie that probably should have never gotten greenlit to begin with. Which is why this movie did not live up to the expectations of Alan Clark's 1988 TV movie. Some things can be emulated, but can't be duplicated. And in this case, this is a primary example at that. In the end, the film only has the characters doing very little except looking intimidating and macho. That's all. The only thing that's good about this movie, really, technically, is the color of their suits, which are really bright and vibrant. But other than that, there's nothing really that redeemingly colorful in terms of plot, in terms of story, in terms of characters, and in terms of performances. This is just a milk-in just to do another reboot since the other one was just so successful. I mean, of course, when it comes to like an actor like Gary Oldman, he's virtually untouchable. But just because Gary Oldman is untouchable doesn't necessarily mean you could try the efforts to outsmart him. I mean, you could have gotten better actors to outperform him. But of course, that would also be a real tough act to follow because I don't think anybody can really hold a candle to Gary Oldman's expertise. Even back in 1988 when he was still kind of relatively young in the business. Okay, according to the discs, it is said that Love has the greatest of admiration for Clark and the original film in general, but felt that the fight scenes were way too frequent and extreme and had very little in terms of a plot. Well, isn't that what the whole idea of football hooliganism is? We're not actually going to watch the sport of football. Well, of course, in Britain they call it football, but here in Canada and the United States, they refer to it as soccer, but of course in Britain they call it football. And yes, they do take their football very seriously, and football hooliganism is very commonplace. I mean, it's almost pretty much the same as street fighting, you know, rooting for the teams, rooting for the oppositions, and they all eventually end up, rumbling out in the streets. And yeah, sure, there were the characters who may look the part, they may get that feeling of fear and intimidation, but in the end, that's all they do. Most of the time, it's just a lot of stare downs. You never see action, you never see violence, and I'm not trying to be a sadist, but if this movie would have passed off more closer to an action themed movie instead of just a drama, maybe this movie could have been just as good as the 1988 Alan Clark thing. And how dare Nick Love say that Alan Clark's movie version was just too much saturated with violence? But isn't that what you came to see if you want to watch a movie based off of football hooliganism? Not just, looking big and tough and toxic and intimidating, and then you don't do shit all. It's kind of almost pretty much a waste of our fucking time. So, in the end, this movie wanted to offer a lot, but really gave us next to nothing. And then I sat there during that whole 90 minutes and I was saying, when are we getting to the fucking action? It just never comes. All it is just stare downs and looking intimidating and wearing big, bright, colorful tracksuits. That's all there is to it. Yes, it is very stylistic, and yes, this movie, even though it was the setting of the movie takes place in the 80s, and there's also a pretty good soundtrack that comes with it, filled with a lot of great 80s music. But if I wanted anything, maybe I should have just entirely skipped the movie and just bought the soundtrack because the soundtrack was fucking awesome. But it was just too bad that this movie did very little to save its hide. It was all style, but very absent in terms of substance. That's all there is to say. But what Love does differently is that it makes the street brawls feel more choreographed, which kind of takes away from the realism from Clark's movie, and it results in being unnecessarily neatly presented and lacks the authenticity layered film that was featured in Clark's original film. Sure, Clark's film was over the top in terms of violence and bloodshed, but then again, if you want to watch a movie based off of football hooliganism, that's what you come to see. Or because it was a made for TV movie originally, that's what you come to watch. And nothing more and nothing less. So what if the original Alan Clark movie, um, had no to very little of a plot and had just a lot of mindless violence? So what? That's what you come to see. It would take a long time to dissect the shortcomings that the 2009 version of The Firm, but the main faults are about Love's movie stems from the sensibility that is given to us over the more awkwardly approached scenes featured here. The commentary is the principal red herring as to why this remake suffers the way it does. Love and his crew come off as a very smarmy and condescending bunch. They seem to take great pride in delivering humor, which is not entirely a bad thing, but the jokes seem way too frequent for a film that really isn't a comedy. In addition to that, the comedy featured here can be quite distracting and lacks the appeal from the original. Sure, the original may have took itself way too seriously, but that's exactly what people expected. If you try to change things around from the original narrative, that means you practically have little to no respect for the original director and that you wanted to do your own interpretation because it just seems like you feel that you are better than Alan Clark and that yours matters while nobody else can top you, which is totally not true. The absence of self-awareness is very obvious, not to mention the decisions to accept other additions in this remake are highly questionable. The real downfall in Nick Love's adaptation is that the character of Bex, played by Paul Anderson, is not the primary character, unlike in the original Alan Clark film. Instead, Love taps his interest on a young novice hooligan named Dom, played by Calum McNab, and he shifts more of the story on his delinquent past, making this film project on a more personal basis. With that said, we can clearly see why Love chose to direct this movie, not to recreate every scene from Clark's movie, but to reflect the memories of his troubled past, in hope that it will attract the more modern movie audience, which in the end becomes a complete and total failure. Overall, the film was a failure on a myriad of reasons. The commentary on Blu-ray is definitely quite provocative with interesting interview segments with Nick Love and a few of the extras. That was actually quite fascinating. And like I said, because there's a lot of 80s nostalgia in there, they have some pretty cool soundtracks of stuff, of music from that era. If you're into like 80s stuff, you know, it is placed into the movie. If you're into that stuff, and that's cool. Hey, I was a child who grew up in the 80s, and these songs, this music actually does take back a lot of memories in my childhood. So I'll also give some trivia to that. As also for fans who grew up in the 80s, a lot of pop culture. For those who want to go on a nostalgia trip to check out the fashion, yes, not to mention the fashion was definitely pure 80s, from the sneakers to the tracksuits to the colorfulness. Because let's face it, most people in the 80s grew up wearing a lot of very colorful apparel. And then by the time you get to the 90s and into the 2000s, we kind of just drained ourselves and would rather prefer to wear one-dimensional clothing. Of course, the style has a lot of 80s feel to it. And of course, as I mentioned before, the soundtrack. So I'm not saying this movie is a complete abomination, because those kind of things are good. But then again, it also falls into that unfortunate trap of all style and no substance. That's kind of like the gist of this whole movie. So though I'll give credit for Love, who knew his selected audience will likely be, he just doesn't reach the same grip that Clark did in his original 1988 TV movie. So therefore, if I was to recommend this movie, I would have just been better if you just watched the 1988 TV movie, if you can find it somewhere on the internet. Maybe one of the Put Lockers or the 123 movies, they might be there. Who knows, maybe you might find it on YouTube or Dailymotion or Vimeo or Metacafe. It's probably around. We just don't know exactly where it is. But other than that, I don't think I could really recommend this movie too much because you don't really see too much hooligan action, and if not, it's also very staged, and also it just doesn't have that same amount of grittiness that Alan Clark's movie had. So it's better if you just watch the TV movie based off of what this movie was based off of by Alan Clark, and just leave this one out. There are better adaptations out there than this one. This movie is a piece of garbage, and it doesn't really deserve too much of a watch. Unless you are into the clothes, the fashion, the style, and the soundtrack is very cool. But other than that, I wouldn't recommend it. But because those three idiosyncrasies in this movie work, I'm probably being too nice about this rating. So in the end, I guess I will have to give The Firm a 5 out of 10. It's that bad. So I guess this ends my writer review. Thank you all for listening in. If you wish to subscribe to my YouTube channel, please feel free to do so. If you wish to leave a comment, go right ahead. But just remember the 3 simple rules. Be kind, be courteous, and please refrain from any rude comments. And I will be back again with another movie review. So until next time, this is Eric Rutrider saying, keep watching those movies, and I'll see you around. Goodbye.